will advocate for justice for my brother. I will stand up, I will speak up, and I will be fearless.
And I saw him. Hey, alikuwa amefura huku. Alimchapa. Alichapa huyo mtoto sana. I saw my dad crying for the first time. My dad was telling me, si wangekuja waniue. He was crying, he was in pain. It was unbelievable. Yeah, whoever did that to that child, alitufanya vibaya sana.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of my story. Imagine your younger brother left the village for Nairobi to visit a relative. 10 days later, you get a call that he has been strangled and tortured to death. How is your family going to take this news, and will justice be served? This is the story we are having today. Who killed Hosea and why was Hosea killed? My name is Eunice and let's listen in. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay.
How
And you?
I'm fine. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
How are you feeling?
I'm well. Yeah.
How are you holding up after everything that has happened?
It hasn't been easy, lakini tunajikaza juu we have no option. Lazima tukue strong because it already happened. Yeah.
And I know someone who is watching us today wanashangaa what is that happened, but before we get there we want to know, who are you? How was life for you and your siblings? And how was life before all this darkness came to be in your lives? Yes.
I am Eunice Wanjiko Kagonda. Yes, I'm 24 years old. I'm the second born in our family of 4. There is my big brother, anaitwa Peter. Then there is me, there is Nahashon mwenye amenifuata, and then Hosea, yeah, who we lost last week, but one, yeah.
How was life for you as siblings, and how are you brought up by your parents?
Okay, we were brought up in a Christian-based family. My mom is a wanaitwa staunch Christians. Yeah, ametulelea kanisa, and we have been brought up with so much love. My father and my mom loved us so much, and tumegrow in a peaceful family. Siwezi sema we have experienced anything like domestic violence or such. Yeah, and we love each other as siblings. Yeah.
I know the story that we are about to hear today involves your brother visiting a relative.
Yes.
When you were younger, the age of Nahashon and younger boys and girls, were you used to going to visit relatives, and what was the relationship between you and your relatives? Okay,
about visiting relatives, my mom didn't like that at all. So me and Peter and Nahashon, we didn't grow up visiting relatives. So tunaweza sema Hosea peke yake ndiye alikuwa amepewa hiyo freedom ya kutembelea relatives. But I'm not saying that we were not going. We used to go, but once in a while. Yeah. And my father hated ile kunafunga shule unaenda kwa relative. He really hated that because walikuwa nadhani tukienda kutembelea relatives, ile discipline wametulea nao itaisha. So especially my mom, ndiye alikuwa na that fear juu she's a very strict woman, very strict. Yeah. So Hosea ndiye alikuwa amepewa hiyo freedom kidogo. Na ni juni last born, it's, you know,
wako lenient kidogo. Yeah. So you the older siblings, you grew up unaenda tu kwa relatives mara once kama umerudi home?
Mara once. Mara zenye nilienda kutembelea cousins zangu ama aunties ni countable. Yeah.
And did that affect your bonding with other relatives?
Yeah. It really did, because right now I rarely talk to relatives. Yeah, I actually have a friend. Alikuwa ananiuliza, you don't have an uncle unaweza ongea na you know freely? Yeah, we are not that close with relatives.
Because you're not used to being together as much.
Yeah, not that there's bad blood between us. There's nothing like that. Yeah.
Okay. So fast forward to when now you are a bit grown. Like right now you are 24. A lot of people of your age don't live with their parents anymore. At what point did you leave home, and were you keeping in touch with your siblings, and how are you meeting, how often, to keep the bond?
Okay, I left home I guess 2024.
That's last year.
Yeah, last year around March. So and the reason why I left home ni mbaya because I discovered I was pregnant. I have a daughter. She's 1 year 4 months old right now, and so I didn't want to embarrass my parents because, as I've said before, mamangu ametulelea kanisa, so I felt like I'd failed her big time. And so when I realized that, I decided to leave home, came to Nairobi, and yeah, started life. Yeah, and so far so good.
Okay,
Yes.
now that's interesting because I can imagine being brought up by a very strict mother and now you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Outside marriage.
Yeah.
How did you break those news to her?
I didn't tell her. And you know, something funny, my brother Nahashon used to ask me, Shikoni kushiba umeshiba kweli? You know? Yeah, lakini mama kwa ijua, nilikuwa naficha sana. Yeah, and then hangenishuku because that would never cross her mind.
Yeah, because my Christian girl, what do you mean?
Yeah, I know. So I decided to leave home. Yeah.
And you went to live with the father of the child?
Yeah.
Okay.
So since then we've been living together.
And since then, had you met with your younger brother since you left home?
After I came to Nairobi, I went silent on everyone because I felt like I never wanted to talk to them. You know, I had done a mistake. And so I used to talk with my little brother, but by then Nahashon was in high school, Form 4. So wakifunga shule, he would call me, Shiko, ulisema nini utakuja nyumbani? You know, and I would tell him, just chill. So later on, last year December, my mom and dad planned and came to Nairobi, and that's how we met. Yeah.
They came to visit you?
Yeah, to visit me. And we met, and now they met my daughter, and we talked things out. And that's why I met now my brothers. Yeah. Hosea and Nahashon. Yeah.
Okay.
So after that, my mom told me to go and live with my cousin, that cousin. And now sasa hapo tulikuwa tunakaa na Hosea pia.
Oh, there's a time where ulikuwa unaishi na cousin yako?
Yeah, now after they knew I have a child, they told me not to live with the father of my child anymore because they wanted to make sure that I'm at a good place. You know, every parent would want that for their kids. Yeah.
And you went to live with the cousin who was living with Hosea till his death.
Yeah. Yeah, so we lived. She was nice to me. Yeah. Until after like 2 months or a month, I left and went back to the father of my child.
Why did you leave?
I just decided to leave. I felt like I was stagnated. I wouldn't think outside the box, like, what can I do? You know, I have a kid here and living at my cousin's place. She's providing everything. She was nice to me, but I just decided no. Yeah.
Talk to us about the relationship between you and your younger brother and the last moments you were making, the time you were together.
We were so close. I loved her. I loved him very much. And I remember he would treat my daughter very well. Angemchukua wanacheza. Namwambia Zoel, nitakubaia hii. You know, I loved him and we were so close. Yeah. So I was actually remembering, like, he would, every time when his birthday reaches, he would tell me, ninunulia hii. So his birthday was yesterday, 15th December. And he would always tell me, ninunulia hii. Hata kama una pesa nipatie tu, hata kama ni 50 bob. Hata akiwa shule, wakienda hizi games za watoto, he would call me. Tunaenda games, nitumie, nibaie, niliona fulani wa mtoto mwenzake. So yeah, we were close and I loved him a lot. Yeah.
When you left him there, did he go back home?
No, he didn't. He didn't. Nilimwacha huko. I guess he left first. He left first for school because they opened school. so akaniacha huko, yeah. But during the time we were together at my cousin's place, we had a really good relationship, yeah.
So kwa huyu cousin, your brother used to go there every school holiday?
Not every school holiday. Once in a while. Tuseme hii holiday angeenda, ingine haendi. Yeah.
But it was often?
Yeah.
Okay. Now this day when he has left for school, alafu akakuja kutembea, for how many days did he stay before you got the news?
He stayed from 24th October because I remember that day he called me and he told me nakuja kwa kazini yangu naweza kuletea nini from home. And I told him, leta kitu utapata. And my mama akampatia ndizi, my mama akampatia 200 bob. Alafu na unga, anakompea unga nilete. So nilikuwa naenda kazi mimi, nilikuwa naacha baba mtoto na mtoto kwa nyumba that time, juu yeye ako kwa nyumba mchana. So Hosea alikuja Nairobi na hakunipata kwa nyumba, so alipea hizo vitu baba mtoto. So nikikuja jioni nikazipata hapa. Yeah.
Banya alikuwa Nairobi, mliona na siku yote?
Hapa. Hiyo ndio kitu inaniuma sana, hatukuonana. I used to tell my friend, bradhangu nikisave pesa nataka nimpeleke Uhuru Park. Alikuwa anapenda Uhuru Park sana. Unajua ni mtoto wa ushago, so hizi vitu kama Uhuru Park ilikuwa inamu-excite sana. So to my friend, I want to save money before we go home for Christmas. I call Hosea and take him to Uhuru Park. You know, yeah. Actually a week before he died, I remember telling my friend, I was thinking because on Sunday it's an off day, we go to Uhuru Park with Hosea. And then she was like, hata una pesa ya kutosha juu Hosea angekuja niambie ninunulie na sina pesa. Yeah.
So that's why you were postponing?
Yeah.
Okay. So he stayed from 24th October till when?
29th November. Yeah.
And then?
So, watu kwa yongea hiyo time yote. On 29th November, ndio sasa he passed. Yeah. He was at my cousin's place and he was playing with other kids outside the plot. And my cousin had left for some occasion in, I guess, Muranga, a place called Kereaini. So a certain man came. Now, we are hearing this story from kids. And a certain guy came and asked, who is Kenyua? And mtoto mmoja akamwonyesha Kenyua ndiye yule. So the guy akachukua Kenyua, akamwambia ati Kenyua hujafunga nyumba. So Kenyua, he was so disciplined na alikuwa anaogopa kukosea. So I guess he panicked. Cousin yangu might come back and find the house haijafungwa, vitu zimeibiwa. So Kenyua akachukua katoto ka cousin yangu kadogo, she's around 2 years and some months. And wakapanda kwenda kuangalia nyumba. And this guy sasa kwa stairs, and he was harassing Kenyua. Anamshika, anamnyonga. Wakapanda mpaka kwa nyumba. And I guess hapo ndio he threatened Kenyua, and Kenyua opened the house and they got in. So when they got in, I hear there's a kid who told the mother Kenyua ananyongwa. But the mother was like, wewe enda kwenye nimekutuma. So she never bothered. So later on, ndio sasa nilipigiwa simu. Hii story yote hata nikuambiwa vile kulienda. Kenyua alipatwa kwa nyumba akiwa amenyongwa.
Nani alikupigia wewe?
Nilikuwa kwa kazi, bradhangu akanipigia. Akaniambia uko wapi? Nikamwambia niko kazi. Akaniuliza uko na mtoto? Nikamwambia hapana, siwezi kuja na mtoto kwa job. Then I sensed something was wrong. So I asked him, what's wrong? Are you okay? And then every time he would call me akiwa na stress, I would ask him, is mom alive? Is dad alive? And Hosea. So they used to make fun with Nahashon. Wewe unashtukanga ovyo ovyo, you know. So I asked him, is mom alive? Is dad alive? Is Hosea alive? And Nahashon. Then I wasn't satisfied with how he responded. So I called my younger brother Nahashon, and then I was like, uko wapi? When was the last time you talked to mom? Akaniambia tuliongea na yeye jana. Nikamuuliza na dad pia yeye. Na Hosea akaniambia shiko ako sawa, unashtuka nini? Kila mtu ako sawa. So I hung up and decided, if wote wako sawa, mwacha niendelee na kazi, tutaonana na brothangu baadaye. But then I wasn't at peace. So I decided, let me close work, nipigie brothangu anielezee vizuri nini inaendelea. So I texted my boss, nikamwambia nimeitwa, kuna emergency. And I called my brother, nikamuuliza ni nini mbaya, akaniambia kuja Kayole Junction. Kusikia Kayole Junction nikashangaa sana. The only person I knew he was there ni Hosea. So kuna nini Kayole Junction? And he was crying.
So kazi yako alikuwa anaishi Kayole Junction?
Yeah, Kayole Junction, a place called Solace. So nikafunga kazi, nikaenda kwa stage na nikaingia kwa gari. So nikiwa kwa gari, Nahashon called me. Akishout, ananiuliza, mmepeleka wapi mom? So bila aliniuliza hivyo, I screamed kwa gari. And now attention yote ya watu hakuwa ni. So nikamuuliza ati nini? Mama amekufa? And then he was like, ni kama juu mimi napiga simu inachukuliwa na watu wengine. So I started screaming, saying my mom is dead. And hapo sasa watu wakaanza kuniuliza, was she sick? Na nilikuwa naambia nilisikia alikuwa mgonjwa, hakuwa nasikia vizuri. So I was so restless kwa hiyo safari yote to Kayole Junction. When I got to Kayole Junction, it was a long journey. But I finally got there and I decided I'm not meeting Peter. I don't want to hear those news. I already know mom is not there. What else do I need to know? So when I got to Kayole Junction, the conductor told a certain guy, huyu msichana hako sawa, mpeleke mpaka kwa nyumba. The guy was called Timo. So Timo paid a motorcycle na tukapelekwa mpaka kwa nyumba.
Sasa kwa kazi yako?
Kwangu.
Unaishi uko pia?
Naishi Kayole.
Okay.
But sasa si uko Kayole Junction.
Okay.
So nikafika kwa nyumba, nikaendea mtoto wangu daycare, nikaenda nikakaa kwa rafiki yangu. Nikamwambia mom is not there. Na Peter alikuwa ameniambia to meet Kayole Junction, but hapana, sitaenda, sitaki kusikia anything. Nikakaa hapo kwa rafiki yangu and Peter called me, uko wapi? Nikamwambia sikuje Kayole Junction. I already know mama amekufa, mbona nikuje? And he was like, mko na nani hapo? Nikamwambia niko na rafiki yangu, mpatie simu. Then akauliza rafiki yangu maswali hapo and akamuuliza naweza kuambia saa hii ama tungoje baba mtoto na my boyfriend. The friend akasema niambie. And she got outside. Now at that point I didn't even care because nilikuwa nishajijazia mom is not there. So when she came in, nikamuuliza amekwambia aje? Mom is not there. Akaniambia no, mom is there. I would never have thought Hosea is dead. So nilikuwa tu naona mom, because I didn't actually come and niuliza mama ako wapi, mmepeleka mama wapi? So the friend told me ni mtu mwingine. Nikamuuliza Hosea. Akaniuliza hiyo jina ingine anaitwa nani? Kenyua. And then she was like, hayuko. I screamed. Then I started asking myself, huyo mtoto wetu alianguka kwa gorofa, I would never have thought aliuliwa na mtu. So we cried and I think I was still in denial. This can't be. you know. So Mwaniki insisted niende Kayole Junction, but I refused. Mwaniki ni Peter, sasa my big bro. I refused. Yeah.
So that day you didn't get to see your brother?
I didn't get to see him. And Peter was calling me so that I can go and see the whole process. Akimtoa kwa nyumba. Yeah. But I refused. Yeah.
After you have received this news that your brother has been killed by someone, what was going through your mind at that moment?
I don't know. It was hard to believe because I was like, ametoka Nyeri akuje uliwe Nairobi. And then nasikia huyu mtu alikuja akiuliza Kenyua ni nani. So he knew him. And then nikatoka hapo nje ya plot, ninaangalia watoto wakicheza. I'm like, kwa watoto wote wenye naona huko natembea hawaulizi na mtu, why Hosea? Alafu sasa the part yenye iliniuma sana ni kujua huyu mtoto alinyongwa. Yeah, it was so hard for me, so hard. Until now I haven't processed it. Yeah.
Okay, Eunice. Talk to us about the time now your cousin will get back to her house. Na kute Hosea is normal. Kuna watu, at what point did she come back and what was she saying?
Actually, my cousin, I've told you she had gone to Kiriaini for an occasion. She was called by the caretaker and she was told Hosea has been strangled in the house. So she was telling me she screamed, and then she started asking, nitaambia auntie nini, now my mom. So hiyo occasion ilisimamishwa hapo, and they left. They went, she called my dad, and now my dad, when he received the news, I guess he kind of lost sense of reality, or I don't know what happened to him. So my cousin told my dad because she thought he would be strong. You know, he's a man, and the society has normalized that, you know, men should be strong. So she never told my mom. So when they got from Kiriaini, they went to our home to look for mom, but now she had already told my dad. So that time, dad na venye aliambiwa alipigia mom. So mom kumbe ashatoka nyumbani, ako on her way to my dad's place. So by the time my cousin are getting home, they never found my mom there. So ndio sasa wakaambiwa ako Mukurweini, where my dad lives, a place just in Nyeri County. So they went there and it was bad. Yeah. My mom was telling me when that time when she found my dad, he was even talking things that are not there. Yeah. Yeah. So it was tough, especially for my dad. It was really tough. In fact, that day his blood pressure went so high. Yeah.
So Eunice, I'm trying to fathom this. Your brother is just a guest to this house.
Yes.
Na si eti anaishingi huku Kayole. So yeye ni mtoto ukuja akienda. And then here comes a person who even knows him by his family name. Like he didn't even call him Hosea, he called him Kenyua. And then he is strangled in your cousin's house. When you're looking at all these happenings, nyi mnaona mwenye alikuwa anamuua alikuwa na motive gani na kwa nini? Mbona mpaka namjua jina? Why would you kill a child?
First of all, I forgot to mention this guy stole a TV, the remote and some gumboots na suitcase. But pardon your question.
Huyu mtu mwenye anajua hadi brother ko jina, why would they want to kill him?
That's our question too. Until now tunajiuliza aliulizia Hosea nini, you know. That child wasn't naughty, so siwezi sema ni mtoto alienda akakosea mtu then or some sort of grudge. Yeah. So until now we want to know aliulizia huyo mtoto nini. Yeah.
And your cousin yeye akisema hana mtu mwenye alikuwa na grudge na yeye ama mtu mwenye anaona anaweza kuwa nini?
that was the first thing I asked her, and she told me she moved to that place on last year May, so atakuwa amejuana na watu around there. Yeah.
That is sad.
Yeah, it's really sad.
When you first came to share that story on your account, when you were sharing that story, of course there were people who are commenting down there, and the first thing that the most common thing that was commented there is that don't rule out that your cousin is not guilty, that your cousin could have, don't rule out and this is a family which is grieving, na ndo huyu mnambua suspect ni huyu. You as a person, is there at any moment do you sit down and like, apa cousin yangu ndo amenyonga ama yeye ndo ako whatever
responsible?
Yes, as a human being.
No. Because we have grown up with that cousin, and I know she's a good person. Yeah, I've told you that she even took care of me with my child. She's a nice woman, so I've never thought about that. Yeah, even my own mom and my brothers. Yeah, we haven't speculated anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. Talk to us about the burial day.
That day it was really hard. It was really hard because I was asking myself, is this really happening? You know, ushaiona ni kama unaota. The burial day niliamka tu kama kawaida, and I not slept the previous day because tulishinda Isli tukitafuta mango za mazishi, and that day the hardest part ilikuwa kutafutia hose yangu zenye atavaishwa. It was really tough. So on the burial day I woke up, prepared myself and my daughter, and we left tukaenda Mama Lucy juu that's where we were getting him from. Yeah. So hapo ndio nikapatana na babangu. I not talked to him before because I was wondering, what do I tell him? There's no amount of words that I would tell him that would encourage him. So I decided to go silent. I wasn't even talking to my brothers that much. So we went to Mama Lucy, met my dad, and I remember him telling me, si wangekuja waniue. He was crying, he was in pain. I saw my dad crying for the first time. Wangekuja waniue, huyo mtoto, he was really tortured by the way. And my dad keeps on saying that until now. And my mom too was hurt, and she was trying to tell me, let's release him. Yeah. And the question that she kept asking me ni, walimtorture kwa nini? Why did they torture that child to that extent? Yeah. It was tough for everyone. Yeah.
And you went to view the body?
Yeah, we did. You know, I was saying I don't want to see him. But he told me now, my boyfriend told me, go see him. Ndio ujuange ukweli Hosea hayuko. Yeah, just to get closure. Hayuko. And I saw him. Hey, that image is still in my mind. That child went through so much. Alikuwa amefura huku. Alimchapa. Alichapa huyo mtoto sana. Alikuwa amefura huku, and my dad was telling me, the doctor alisema ni kama aligongeshwa kwa ukuta. Yeah. It was really hard.
When you once saw his body on that coffin, what was going through your mind watching your brother?
I remember asking him, Hosea siadi uniite because most of the time Hosea alikuwa mtu anipe pesa, you know. Actually tulikuwa tuna make fun tukimwambia ukiona mtu ni pesa tu. So I was asking Hosea amkonitishe pesa hata, you know. And alikuwa hapo aziniita. It was unbelievable. Yeah, whoever did that to that child, alitufanya vibaya sana. Hosea angeniongea because he'd even call me na niuliza, wewe mama zoe mtoto wako aje? Now looking at him in that coffin broke me. it really broke me. Yeah. So mpaka saa nikikaa nikikumbuka venye kalikuwa kamelala, kamefunga tu macho, kamefura huku. That memory, it can't be erased. That image can't be erased. Yeah. So tukamuona, and now we proceeded to Nyeri. Yeah, kumzika. And kwa gari nilikuwa nimekaa next to my father, and one question that he kept on asking me ni, tutapata justice kwa hii nchi kweli? Tutapata justice? And I was trying to stay strong for him. Namwambia tutapata, usijali. Then he was telling me, huyo mtu alitesa huyo mtoto sana. Akiweza shikwa, mimi natamani tu nimtafune na hii meno yangu aishe tu. Yeah. So we really talked with my father kwa hiyo journey. Na alikuwa tu ananiambia wameamua tu anichukulie mtoto bright hivyo, because Hosea was really bright. Hata hakuwa anasoma, but unapata anapita mitihani. And then they used to joke a lot with my father. Wewe kwanza alikuwa anamuita we Kagoda, you know. Jina babangu ni Kagonda. We Kagoda lehe besha. Yeah. For those who haelewi ni we Kagonda leta pesa. Yeah. Na pia kama huna utaniletea kesho. And hata dada alikuwa ananiambia, huyu mtoto hata akiwa nyumbani nikikutoka kazi, kitu ya kwanza alikuwa ananiwomia maji ya kuoga na ananipelekea bafu. Nikirudi kazi ananizindikisha. Yeah. My father is in pain, and that man will never be the same. Yeah.
When you see people, allow me to ask this, because
Yes.
a lot of people are speculating that your cousin might have killed your brother. And I know families na kuanga tu na mambo yake. Unajua family, there's you, the nuclear family, and then there's the extended family. And of course, maybe some of them might have had the same notion. Was it tough for your cousin now to attend this burial? And what was the reception for her during that day?
She attended. Yeah, she was allowed to attend, and it was just normal. Yeah, venye tumezoea kurelate na yeye. We were actually seated, my dad, mimi na yeye, and they were talking. Yeah. You know, people must speculate. You can't stop people from that. Yeah. But I would tell them not to speculate anything right now, because the matter is already with the authorities and they will do their job. Yeah.
Don't speak about you in the past tense. Losing you feels like a wound that will never fully heal. You went too soon, bro. Far too soon. Every time I see these videos, it hits me all over again. It's like a piece of you still sitting next to me, laughing, enjoying the little things. And that's what breaks my heart most, knowing I would hear that laugh again. And I want the whole world to know that I will advocate for justice for my brother. I will stand up, I will speak up, and I will be fearless. Because Hosea's life matters and his memory deserves to be honored.
And justice will be served.
Yeah,
eventually.
exactly.
Okay.
So it was just normal until now. We talk once in a while. Yesterday I called her and asked how she's coping up, and she told me she's not okay. Yeah, because she's asking herself the same question. Who did that? Yeah.
Now, how is the family holding up from all of this that happened?
So after the burial day, my brother Peter told me, I told my brother I'm not coming back to Nairobi. I have to stay here with mom, because I know she's broken. She's trying to stay strong for us, but I know deep down she's so broken. And my brother told me, when you stay here, it shall be worse for you. Go grieve in your house. And I told him it's okay. And then mom also told me the same. Rudi kazi, itakuwa sawa, juu ukikaa hapa itakuwa worse, utafikiria mambo mingi. So Peter left the next day, and I decided I will stay for a whole week. So I stayed with mom, and I remember her coming to my bed and told me, will justice ever be served? Then I was like, in my mind I was like, this woman ametuonyesha she's strong, kumbe deep down anajiuliza maswali. And then sometimes she'd wake up anasema kitu kama, sasa who tortured that child? Anasema hiyo iko siku mbaya ya Hosea aki, you know, na ungeona tu amechange. But one thing I love about my mother is she would sit me down, ananiambia, ananisomea neno la Mungu. And right now the God's word isn't make sense to me at all. It's not making sense at all, but she would tell me, no, the Bible says, you know. And then she was also telling me, usiongee kitu sana, inakuumiza, and the world will not understand you. Yes, mtu atakuja kwambia, Eunice, I know the pain you're feeling, I also lost my mother, I also lost my brother, but no, only God understands your pain. Especially, you know, we're in so much pain because this child, we lost him so tragically, you know. He didn't deserve to die that way. Actually, my mom was telling me, heri hata angekuwa mgonjwa nisemange, you know, ugonjwa iliniulia mtoto. But now knowing that it's a person who is just out here, alienda akamuua, that pain is just unbearable. Yeah.
And Dad, how is he?
I've told you that Dad will never be the same. That man has changed. He will talk to me, ananiambia, hizi kesi mtu upata justice. He would tell me that every other time. Namwambia, yeah, to encourage him. And then he told me, vitabu za Hosea zisipeanwe nilete. So the only thing I took from vitabu zake ni a Bible, nikakuja nayo, but the rest nikamwacha, nikamwambia utazieka vizuri. And then sasa ungesikia akikwambia, unaona ile napier grass Dara tulipanda na Hosea, alikuwa ananiambia ikikuwa nataka kuuza, you know, anashinda amerudia vitu za Hosea, until my mom was like, acha kuongea kitu sana inakuumiza. And I told my mother, no, let him talk, it's part of healing, you know. But my mom was like, hapana, naona venye the more he is talking the more anaumia. And now tangu dada receive news za Hosea, blood pressure yake inasumbua sana. Yeah. He can't stop thinking. Yeah.
Okay. I know now, because this is a crime that was committed, people expect that there were people maybe who are arrested, people who are questioned, and maybe the progress of the case. So how far are we, and why was anybody arrested? Were people questioned? Who were questioned by the police? You can tell us about that.
First and foremost, I want to say that I don't have so many details about that, because my brother Peter is really trying as much as possible to shield me from hizo vitu zote, because I think anaona nitakuwa, this will affect me. But all I know is that my cousin went and akaandikisha statement kwa Obama police station, because just around where she lives. And my brother na yeye ndio waliulizwa maswali. Yeah. And then they went to DCI Kayole, au ndio waliendea mwili. Yeah.
So hiyo hapo ndo, that's it. No one has been arrested.
So far no one has been arrested. Yeah. And I feel like it has taken so long. Yeah. We already buried Hosea on 5th. Tangu ile siku aliuliwa on 29th November until now, no one has been arrested. Aje, and there was a CCTV footage yenye inaonyesha huyo mtu.
Oh.
Yeah.
Have you watched it as a family?
No. My brother and my cousin watched it. And huyo mtu najua pia alinyonga mtoto na apron. Yeah, alimnyonga na apron. So I feel like the fingerprints ziko up, they took. Yes, and alikuwa amemfunga mkono na cable ya charger. Yeah.
So alikuwa amefunga mtoto, amemgongesha kichwa, alafu akamnyonga na nini?
Na apron. But ni kama kwanza alimnyonga na mkono juu the doctor alisema alikuwa amevunjika hii mfupa ya hapa. Yeah. Tena sasa akamfunga na apron.
You know, I'm struggling to understand because I'm assuming ilikuwa mchana, right? Because Hosea was playing outside with other kids.
Yes.
Hakuna hata neighbor ama mtu hata anasemanga I saw a tall wherever guy akipita ama mtu hata alisikia screams juu there's no way mtoto atanyongwa tu hivyo amenyamaza. Na hii time yote anaongeshwa, nobody even had a scream or anything.
That's my exact question. Hakuna mtu alisikia huyu mtoto hata akipiga nduru aende amuokoe. And you know the funny part is, even after this happened, hakuna neighbor alikuja kuuliza cousin yangu. You know, una expect kitu kama hiki happen, neighbors hata kama hamuongeangi, hata kama mjazoeana kuja kuuliza what happened, because you never know, labda hata ni mtu wako tu within. No one. My cousin was telling me hakuna mtu alienda kumuuliza. Apart from one woman alikuwa hapo ni alienda kumsaidia, but the rest na plot ni kubwa, hakuna mtu alienda kumuuliza.
Wewe sasa unaketingi hivi unajua like my brother was strangled to death or tortured to death kwa nyumba fulani na ni mchana kulikuwa na watu and no one came to his aid. How do you feel as the elder sister?
So bitter, and I hold so much resentment towards the neighbors pia wa hiyo nyumba and towards that woman mwenye mtoto anasema aliitwa na you know, najua labda sifai kukuwa angry at her, but I feel like there's something that she could have done. Akiambiwa Hosea anafanywa hivi, angeenda angalie, you know, but she never did. It has changed my perception kuhusu watu. I was telling him, you're on your own kwa hii dunia. Huyo ni Hosea, 13-year-old, my brother aliuliwa kukiwa na watu mchana. It was around saa 9 saa 10. So I guess my relationship with people will never be the same. I don't want a lot of friends. I don't want interactions na watu because no one saved my brother, and it's not like I'm feeling like they had to, but I feel like
someone should have done something. How do you remember your brother?
He was a good child, a very disciplined child, and he knew God because we have been brought up in a Christian-based family, and my mom took us to Sunday school tukiwa wadogo. Sisi ni wale wa kuchapwa juu umemisbehave kanisa. He knew the word of God, and he was so cheeky. Na nakumbuka tu alipenda pesa. Iko tu shiko nipe pesa. Nipe 20 bob wewe, wezi kosa. You know, and he was bright. He was a genius. Actually, I would ask him, unasomanga saa ngapi? Na nikikuuliza swali, I remember, you know, sisi hatujasoma CBC thing. So vitu kama litmus paper tulizijua tukiwa high school. So there was a time he said, inakaa litmus paper. Alikuwa grade 7. And I asked him, ulijulia wapi hiyo? And he started explaining to me, you know, blue litmus paper when it changes to this color. So I don't know why God would take away my brother in such a cruel way. I'm mad at him.
You're mad at God?
I'm mad at God. I no longer pray tangu a pass because I used to pray for each and every, all of them. Mungu, kumbuka Peter, kumbuka Hosea, kumbuka mom. But he still allowed that to happen. You know, that has shaken my faith.
When he was younger, what was he saying that he would want to become when he's older? And what kind of a man do you believe that Hosea would grow to become?
Hosea loved things to do with, you know, stima, kutengeneza juu. Hata wangegombana na dad. Juu ameenda amechukua vitu za babangu, ameanza kutengeneza tu stima hapo. You know, he used to have the same behavior with Nahashon mwenye amenifuata because he's also doing electrical engineering. So I guess he would be an engineer. Because he used to love hizo vitu sana. Angetengeneza kitu na shanga huyu ni mtoto mdogo. You know, angekuja kwambia this is a negative side, this is a positive, ufai kushikanisha hizo wires sijui aje. and he would grow to be a very prominent person in this country. Yeah, that's what I would say, because he had all it takes for one to be prominent. Yeah.
Okay. Looking back, before everything happened, ukiangalia nyuma nini unasemanga, I wish this day I did this, I wish this day I did this, I wish this day I went to meet him, and I wish we spent more time together. What are some of the moments that makes you wish that you spent that particular moment with Hosea?
I mentioned before that nilikuwa nataka kumpeleka kama Uhuru Park. So I keep on telling myself, I wish hiyo siku. Actually, I was sharing it with my cousin and she told me, heri ungemkujia, haingefanyika hivi vyote. You know, then naanza kujiambia, ile siku aliniomba hii kitu nikamwambia sina, ngoje. I wish I would have done it, you know. Ile siku alisema nataka kwenda school trip, nikamwambia sina pesa. I wish ningeng'ang'ana tu nimfanyie. I wish I would call him like oftenly. You know, there are a lot of things that I'm wishing I did, but it's too late. And I told myself, if I keep on wishing, you know, and regretting, that will affect my healing process. So have to accept sikuzifanya. Yeah. Sikuzifanya. And he loved my daughter, so sometimes nasema I wish hata wangekakaa na Zoel kidogo. Yeah. But sasa ilifanyika. We have nothing to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you're telling this story so that you can try and fight for justice for your brother. And if at all that person is gonna be caught and you're gonna meet this person, what would you tell your brother's killer? And what would you wish it's done to this person?
You know, I asked my father the same question. I actually asked him, if he's caught, shall we be given a chance to talk to him? And he told me he thinks we shall be given a chance to talk to him. And I told him, I don't know what I would say to this person. I would want answers. Like, why did you torture Hosea? And all this time, while he was pleading for his life, because of course he was telling him usiniwe or something, you know, I normally create a picture of what was happening. I would ask him, none of those screams ingekufanya umwachilie. And then, if this whole thing was about you stealing, is my brother's life worth a TV and a remote and a suitcase? You know? Yeah. But I don't think that their answers zenye anaweza nipatia zifanye ni feel, you know, kama nimeheal. Hakuna. And what I would wish
Is done to them.
Is done to them. Afungwe tu. Yeah, hakuna huruma, because kama hakuhurumia Hosea, mbona mimi nimhurumia? And that's the same thing I told my dad. Even if tukuje tuambiwe it's mtu wa familia, afungwe, afungwe kabisa. Yeah, because I'm so angry. I wish I had the power to revenge. Ni venye tu the law doesn't allow, I would, but yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, I want him to rot in jail. Yeah.
For what he did.
For what he did. He took something that was so precious to us, and nothing can replace Hosea. And then I can imagine the pain that Hosea went through. A lot of pain. Unajua, sometimes I'm even holding my throat. Nashika hapa. Kama kushika hivi, you're feeling uncomfortable. Now tell me.
Makaikatike.
That's a mad person. I want him to rot in jail. Yeah.
So Eunice, first of all, thank you so much for standing for your brother and fighting. I've seen even what you're trying to do even on your TikTok page, and it's very, very brave of you. And even sitting here to tell us this story, I can see you're still hurting. You're still trying to fathom everything that happened, but again, you still choose every day to wake up and see that your brother's justice has been served. If Okay, I know this might sound very controversial, but I believe like the spirits of people that we love, even if they're dead, like they're somewhere they can hear us. I don't know. I believe they can still hear us of something. If Hosea was listening to you right now, what would you say to him?
What I would say to Hosea is, you know, during his burial, in my tribute, I told him, I'll fight for you. I'll fight for you, Hosea. And that's what I'm telling him, wherever he is. I'm sure he's in heaven. I'll fight for you, bro. Because your life mattered. Yes, and the main reason as to why I'm seeking justice is to honor you. Yeah, to honor your life. You didn't deserve to die that way, in that cruel manner, because of a person who don't know what humanity is. Hosea, nothing will stop me from fighting for you. I don't care if the world has normalized people being murdered, and you know, they go away with it, they get away with it. I don't care about that. I will fight for you. Yeah. And I'm not giving up, because unapata hata sometimes TikTok mtu anakuambia, you know, this Kenya watu wanauliwa and nothing is done, but I'm with God, and yule mwenye alifanya hicho kitendo, ama everyone who was involved, I want them to know that justice will haunt them. It will find them, because I believe in God. And I've been telling him, let this fight not end up in Hosea not getting the justice that he deserves, you know. Yeah. So that's the only thing I can say to Hosea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you are a parent, and you've mentioned earlier that growing up you saw your parents being very they were not open to you going to relatives' places, and now coming to what happened to your brother in your cousin's house. Is that something that is making you as a parent be like, sidhani kama mtoto wangu atawahi atenda kulala kwa mtu ama kutembelea mtu nje?
Not at all, because I was telling other mothers kwa TikTok, anything inaweza pata mtoto hata ukiwa na yeye. Because hata before I left home, we were discussing with my mom, and she was telling me, si hata ulisikia watoto fulani walipatwa na gari kwa nyumba yao wakiwatch TV. So stop blaming yourself, eti maybe kama angekuwa nyumbani, you know. So yeah, sijafikiria hivyo. Yeah.
Okay.
Because anything inaweza fanyika mtoto hata ukiwa na yeye.
For sure.
So for those who are saying, mimi mtoto wangu ndio maana sipendi aende kwa relatives, hawajui kitu anasema. Yeah. So what I can say ni, as parents, let's protect our kids mali tunaweza, you know. Mambo negligence tuache. Yeah.
Okay. Sawa.
Yeah.
I know that you're looking for justice, and that is our prayer, that we don't just sit here and it's never served. Praying that one day we will wake up and I'll see your text saying that finally we've got the person and the proceedings are starting and justice will be served. But even before that, what is keeping you moving? Like every day you choose to say, like, you know, you can give up, you can say like, he's dead, I don't care who did it now, I want to find peace and my healing. What is making you, like, every day you can wake up, choose to live again, choose to still fight even when your heart is broken, even when you're weak, you're choosing to live to fight for justice on a daily? What keeps you moving?
Well, first of all, I think God is giving me strength, and then I feel like whatever I'm doing is just part of my healing journey. Yeah. And then the pain, the anger, the bitterness, the resentment, that is all that is keeping me going. Yeah.
and also the love I had for Sarah. Yeah, and I'm not stopping. I will not stop. It's until we get justice for our child. Yeah.
Okay.
Because even Peter was telling me, my brother now, Shiko, relax, kila kitu itakuwa sawa. Nafuatilia, but I know he was just telling me that to feel like. But I told him, no, I'm not stopping. Yeah, we must address these issues for society, because you also heard about the other case of, I guess she was 12.
Yeah, 12-year-old girl.
Yeah, now you can imagine, why do we have these people in this society? Why? These are people who we need to eliminate them. They don't deserve to live with us, normal human beings. Because I believe for a person to kill a child, huyo mtu hako sawa. Hako sawa. Kids are innocent. In fact, my dad kept on telling me, kids are innocent. How would someone decide to kill a child? You know?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's being possessed or what. But we have to eliminate these people. Let's not normalize easy case ati, no, she was murdered, it happens. No, when we do that, we'll never put an end to it.
Yeah.
We will never put an end to it.
Yeah. We're just adding on the statistics.
Exactly. Yeah. So justice for all those kids. Not only kids, even people, even adults.
No one deserves to lose their life.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And no one has the right to take away someone's life. Only God can do that. Yeah. Don't take a life that doesn't it's not yours to take, you know. Yeah.
Okay. Someone is watching you this morning and they would want to connect with you. Probably they are going through grief. I know you have not healed yet, but you see, like, sometimes quote unquote misery loves company. Like when you are broken, a lot of you you can at least share and give some tips on how to move out of that darkness. Where can they find you?
Okay, my TikTok page. Yeah, and actually I used not to post anything. I'm an introvert. And you know, I don't know, I guess it's the pain that made me, you know, say no, introvert, kukua introvert, uchanieke kando. And then another issue, people were asking, mbona unavaa mask? Unatubo?
Yeah, you are wearing the mask then.
It's because uyo siku ndio hata ni post video ya kwanza tulikuwa na yeye kwa kazi yangu. And I told him, give me a phone because it has a good camera. Ni post. But then I told him, and the way I'm insecure about my teeth, I don't have a perfect
dental formula.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Because people have bullied me before nikiwa campus na nikiwa high school. I told him, I will buy a mask and put it on. You know, watu watafikiri naiweka juu ya security reasons. But hapo ndio sasa nikava mask and now nikapost. So yeah, niliva mask due to insecurity reasons, but now I'm no longer afraid.
Yes, you shouldn't. I mean, so
you know, people out here, they lack empathy. So ungepata hata wengine wanani troll like
I understand. Internet is very brutal. Someone might assume the entire point and start focusing on something. And especially when you are yourself insecure about the particular thing, inaweza kugonga. So it's allowed. Protect your peace of mind. At all costs.
I never wanted so much stress your time.
Okay.
So find me at my TikTok page, Zoels, Z-O, capital Z, then O-E-L-L-E-S. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can find me there. We can share more.
Sawa. So thank you so much. Unless you feel like there's anything that you have not touched on and you would love us to talk about, I feel like we have exhausted that conversation. How did you feel sharing this story with us today?
I felt nice. I felt relieved, you know, and I believe that someone somewhere will watch this story and my brother will find justice. And to everyone else who has gone through this, because I would see some comments saying cousin yangu pia aliuliwa, then I'm like, we don't hear these cases, so this is happening. And now I want people to see the reality of such violent crimes. Ziko. So let's create awareness about all this. Again, I would like to tell people to just be kind to these people who are grieving. Like, it's not easy. hata uambie, no amount of words can make someone feel better, you know. Yeah, so that's my parting shot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're
and
welcome.
I wish you all the healing and may
Thanks.
justice be served eventually.
Yeah.
So what you'll do, you share with us the link to your TikTok account and then I'll share it down below so that people can click and find you there.
It's okay.
Because typing a name might give them a lot of names, but now the
yeah.
link will take them directly
It's okay.
to the page. So thank you so much.
You're
and more
welcome.
healing and grace to you.
Thanks a lot.
And to you, our viewer, thank you for sticking with us up to this point of today's episode. Remember that the link to her TikTok page will be on the pinned comment below. Reach out to her, kindly encourage her, and if you can assist her in any way in the search for her brother's justice, that will be highly appreciated. Also, remember to keep the comment section only encouraging and respectful, and if you haven't yet subscribed to this platform, do so and support us. Until next time, my name is Njeremasi. Just keep it Tuko.